All right, so on this portion of the video, we're going to use the 4 right triangle theorems to prove triangle congruence. And the first one, leg, leg, hypotenuse angle, hypotenuse leg, and the last one, leg angle. So in these examples, we're asked to look at them and determine which theorem we could use to prove the right triangle is congruent. So here I have legs that are congruent, and the hypotenuse of these 2 right triangles are congruent. So I can prove these triangles are congruent using hypotenuse leg. In the next example, once again, I have the hypotenuses that are congruent. And then, remember, I have the shared side here that would have to be congruent. And so, once again, that shared side is a leg. So I can prove using hypotenuse leg that this right triangle here is congruent to this right triangle on this side. Then in number 3, again proving 2 right triangles, I have a leg, a pair of legs that are congruent, and I have a pair of angles that are congruent. So here in number 3, I can use leg angle to prove that these triangles are congruent. Then in example number 4, I've got side FG, or segment FG, is perpendicular to HK. So right away I know I formed a right triangles there. I'm also given that angle F is congruent to angle G. So I've got an angle in a right triangle, and when I look at it, I have a shared side here that's going to be congruent. So the side that's congruent and shared is the leg, and so I have an angle here. So I can prove that triangle FHK is congruent to triangle GHK. How? By leg angle. All right, let's move on to number 5. In number 5, I've got an isosceles triangle identified here, and that isosceles triangle is the triangle LJK. And once I know it's an isosceles triangle, right, I know that these 2 sides are congruent. Then it goes on to say that angle GJL, this angle here, is congruent to angle IJK, this angle right here. And it also says that side GL is perpendicular to side GI, so I know that's a right angle. And side KI is perpendicular to side GI, so I know that's also a right angle. So I'm going to focus on these 2 triangles in terms of trying to prove 2 triangles congruent. So when I look at it, I have 2 hypotenuses that are congruent, and I have 2 angles that are congruent. So I can say the triangle GJL is congruent to triangle I over here, IJK. Why? Because of hypotenuse angle. All right, let's look at the last example here, and then we'll move on to doing a couple of proofs. So it says Q is the midpoint of PX. So if Q is the midpoint of PX, I know this side is congruent to this side. And I know I've got a shared leg here in the middle. So I can prove that triangle PQZ is congruent to triangle XQZ. Why? By leg, because I have two legs that are congruent in each triangle. All right, now we're going to move on to proofs, and we're going to do two proofs tonight. And I'm going to return to my favorite, the two-column proofs. So let's look at this first diagram here. And just to have enough room, I'm going to use a separate sheet of paper here. So once again, when we look at proofs, we are always wanting to first plan out where we're going. So I'm going to label the proof. EB is congruent to DB. That's a given. Angle A and angle C are right angles. Add that. B is the midpoint to AC. So right away I know that. And now it wants me to prove that BEA triangle is congruent to BDC. So I've got a hypotenuse and a leg that are congruent. So I know I could use hypotenuse leg. So I'm going to write a statement here. Draw my line. And then my reasons over here. And I'm going to start out with what's given to me. And I've got EB is congruent to DB. And I've got angle A and angle C are right angles. And I've got B is the midpoint. Okay? And that's all given to me. Then in step 2, I'm going to go on and say that angle A must be congruent to angle C. Why? Kind of the definition of right angles, right? All right angles are congruent. And then step 3, I'm going to add that since B is the midpoint, AB, I should say, is congruent to BC. And that's the definition of a midpoint. So now I've proven that this sides are congruent. I've got my right angles here, and I was told at the beginning that my two hypotenuses are congruent. So I can make that final statement that triangle BEA is congruent to triangle BDC. And why? Because of hypotenuse leg. Now, just so that you understand, I'm going to also do this in a paragraph proof. And the book uses some paragraph proofs also. So let me just do that example of the same proof. So I would say it's like writing a paragraph, writing a paper in English class. You're just explaining why you can do things. So I would say, given EB is congruent to DB, okay, and angle AC and angle C are right angles, then angle A has to be congruent to angle C. Why? Or because, I shouldn't say why, because of the definition of right angles. And also given that B is the midpoint of side AC, then AB is congruent to BC. Okay? So then I can say, therefore, triangle BEA is congruent to triangle BDC by hypotenuse leg. So that's an example of a paragraph proof. You really are just trying to support each prior thought or each thought with some supporting reason, just like you do in a two-column proof. So I wanted to do that example also for you. This is called a paragraph proof. All right, let's go on to one last proof for tonight. And I'm going to just lay it out for you in pretty general terms. So it says AB is perpendicular to CM. So I've got two right angles here because AB is also perpendicular to DB. M is the midpoint of AB, so I know these two sides are congruent. And then it says CM is congruent to DB. So right away, I've got two legs that are congruent. So I know I can use leg. So I'm going to fall back on my statement and my reason. So I've got a series of things that are given. AB is perpendicular to CM. BD is perpendicular to DB. And M is midpoint of AB. And finally, CM is congruent to DB. Okay, all that's given to me. So now I can say that AM is congruent to MB. Y definition of the midpoint. And I can now say the triangle ACM is congruent to triangle MBD. And the reason is leg. Okay, let's get your parent's signature and call it a night. See you tomorrow. Remember, quiz tomorrow. So come prepared, 4-1 to 4-3 quiz.